All right, welcome. I'll call this WRC Full Commission, our annual business meeting to order. It is 6:02 p.m. Thank you all for being here. We have more than a quorum, so thanks everybody for making the time. Do we have any amendments to the agenda? All right, hearing and seeing none. We'll move on to the first item, which is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was May 28th, 2024. The link to the meeting minutes, the draft meeting minutes was provided in the agenda. I hope everybody had the ability to access them. I would entertain a motion to approve our May 28th, 2024 meeting minutes. Thank you, Jack. Do I have a second? Thank you, Bonnie. So motion by Jack, a second by Bonnie to approve the May 28th, 2024 meeting minutes. Do I have any corrections, comments, or further discussion? All right, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Okay, just give me a minute to make sure I see everyone. All right, thank you. I think there's any nays? Any abstentions? Anne, I see your hand. Peter, I see your hand. Paul, I see your hand. Anyone I missed that was abstaining? I have you on multiple screens, so I
saw 3 abstaining, or 4.
4, okay. Thank you. All right, so motion passes. The meeting minutes are approved. Moving on, and our main focus tonight is obviously our annual business meeting. The first item up is the approval of our FY 2025 work program and budget. Just for some background, the draft work program and budget were provided in our meeting packet. This has been reviewed by our finance committee, as well as our executive board. And both have made the recommendation to approve the FY 2025 work program and budget. So I hope everybody had the ability to take a look in advance. Inessa Muse, our finance manager, is here tonight. Thank you, Inessa, for both putting this together and for being at our meetings and helping us work through our questions about it. So with that, I will open it up to Chris and Inessa, just to, again, hopefully everyone had a chance to take a deeper dive into the documents, but just to bring our attention to sort of the highlights or big changes that are in this year's budget.
So I'll introduce it. Yeah, so as Gabby noted, I'm going to do a high-level overview, but feel free to ask questions. So the main difference between this year and prior year work program is, and this isn't reflected heavily in the work program yet, but the Act 181, which is what I refer to as the Act 250 reform bill, over the coming months and years, this bill is going to affect how development areas are defined, the content of and format of regional future land use maps. It's going to create a new land use review board to review regional plans. It's going to establish jurisdictional tiers that are going to determine municipal versus state jurisdiction, among other things. We received some one-time funding to help support the effort that all the RPCs are going to have to put into this. Staff met for about almost 2 hours today talking about internally what all we were going to need to do. And that includes, and I'll get into this later on in the meeting during my report, but how we're going to explain this to you, and also how it's going to jive with our current regional plan update. And updates that we're going to have to do to that update in the not too distant future over the next couple of years. We'll also be reaching out to towns and supporting towns in their understanding of what these changes mean. So this was going to be an evolving and changing context over the next year and years to come, really. The biggest budgetary impact that we had is we had basically the state, state nationwide FEMA cut emergency management planning funding to states by 10%. And because Vermont is so reliant upon federal funding to support all of its emergency planning work, including that of the state, and then the funding that gets passed down to the regional planning commissions, that 10% cut at the state level translated into a 20 to 30% cut for an emergency planning grant funding for the RPCs. For us specifically, it's closer to 20%, 19 point something percent. So what this means is that the state is going to have to take on some of the tasks like supporting the development of local emergency management plans that are required of each town after town meeting. They're going to play more of a role in the regional emergency management committee administration and other tasks that we typically would do more robustly with towns. One of the things, but from a budget standpoint, that shortfall is actually going to be made up by additional funding we're getting to help towns develop hazard mitigation grant proposals for submission to FEMA. So from an overall budget standpoint, we're not seeing much of a hit this year, but as a group, RPCs are really going to need to have a conversation with Vermont Emergency Management and Department of Public Safety and the legislature about whether or not the state feels like this cut should be sustained. And I think really we need to have a more robust conversation about the extent to which the state relies on federal funding for basic emergency management planning. So we'll see what happens from a budget standpoint. We're okay. It didn't put us into a hole because we had additional supplemental funding to do other work in support of our towns, but we really need to think through as a state, how we're going to continue to work with emergency management directors at the town level, work with them on preparedness, work with towns in developing of their local emergency management plans. So those are the plans that towns use to basically lay out for themselves, like what they themselves specifically are going to do in a disaster. That is what the town itself is going to stand up and how it's going to respond to, I shouldn't say a disaster, to an emergency. The regional plan update is well underway, as I mentioned. The plan is going to be in digital form. We're expecting a draft plan to be revealed to you in the coming weeks. And so I'm going to be working with staff and working with the executive board about how we'll roll that out to you guys first, and then we'll roll that out to the broader public. And then last year, you may recall that there was a municipal technical assistance program, municipal energy resilience program. Both of those are winding down, so you'll see less influence of those in our budget. So that's the highlights of really the work program. Any questions about the work program before we go to budget? Laura, your hand is raised.
Is this the right time, Chris, or should I wait for the budget?
This is fine.
So I just thank you. Chris and I were able to speak today, and I've had a couple of conversations with him and Gabby and Jack around the work plan on page 9 and the project review committee. And just wanted to talk about whether or not we can provide on the website, maybe a link of the projects that we have decided to engage in, and or when we make when we weigh in with statements on behalf, like letters, submit letters in cases to the district commission or otherwise. Include those as well.
You talk about Act 250, Section 248, those things, right?
Yes. Yes. I think it'd just be helpful for our districts, particularly as you talked about this new land use bill, massive land use bill that was passed, and I think it just would be a good practice to start while the volume is maybe not as heavy as it may become. So just like to throw that out there for staff. I know I talked with you earlier, Chris, so won't take up any more time about that, but wanted to put it down on the table. Thanks.
Yeah, Gabby, I don't know if you want to say anything, but just from a staff perspective, Laura is encouragement about this. This is one of the reasons why you see on the full commission agenda, we've added a new, what's going to be a standard item on project review committee reports. And we'll be talking to exec board, but especially Jack as chair of the project review committee and Gabby as chair, about posting more kind of information about what projects WRC is reviewing, what comments the project review committee is making, and what comments are being filed publicly on by the project review committee. So we'll work out the logistics on that so that that information is more readily available or easily available. But Gabby, if you or Jack, do y'all have anything you want to add?
I think, you know, full disclosure of everything is always good. And we do publish our agenda publicly. It's available on the website. It talks to what projects we are or aren't going to work on. Our comments, we don't comment on certainly every project we talk about. And some of our comments, even if we were to publish them, you really need to go to the A&R or the PUC database to put them into context. Sometimes our comments are very clear standalone. Other times they're supporting other comments that have been made. And if you haven't read those other comments, like from A&R or some other state agency or some other party to the process, they're going to be meaningless. So you really need to go out and look at the database. And our agenda, when we talk about any project, we always list the project number, which makes it extremely easy to go to either the DEC or the PUC database and look up those projects. And, you know, if you're interested in a project, that's really what you need to do to see the full context of what's going on and what issues may or may not be being raised by all the different parties to the process. You know, we can certainly publish our comments, but standalone, they're not always as meaningful as you would think they might be.
And so I think just, you know, I think one of the things we do want to do is make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And that's one of the, I think everybody's actually interested in what's going on with the project review committee. And I think that shows in the interest of the questions you have that the board members, the commissioners have when Jack does bring up the projects that are under review. And that's why we've added it as a standing full commission item. I think we're also intending to bring any major items of regional significance to the full commission. And I think anything that, you know, everything's public. So as far as documents and, you know, I think that we'll take it back to staff and to you and to Jack and the chair. But it might just make sense to just record the meetings and then there's the context as well. But we could talk about how to make things make sense for people who want to learn about what's going on with Act 250 and 248. Project and our review of them.
Yeah, because traditionally, even though we haven't had it as an agenda item until very recently, when there's been something of particular interest, particular size, particular relevance, we have talked about it in this meeting. And I'm, you know, just thinking back of some of the really big things like Deerfield Wind and Haystack and the Mount Snow Master Plan and things that were quite large and in many ways were controversial. And took a good long time to get through the application review process.
So I think to summarize this is, I think this is a great discussion. Thanks for bringing it up, Laura. And I think we're all on the same page that we want to make sure the full commission's aware of everything that's going on and the public. And I think we'll work with, you know, Chris and Jack and staff to do what we can to make it as long as it's not a heavy lift for staff. To make things that are already public accessible. Yeah, Edie?
Separate topic. I'm noticing that local hazard mitigation planning has Halifax's still underway, and I believe that we did kind of close that out. This also pertains into the budget session, and I just wanted to recognize that I did not get a chance to start to review this until, you know, the hour before the meeting. But my question is just about those kinds of minor changes not being a problem to, you know, explicitly call out, or, you know, this is really intended to be the big picture view of what the Windham Regional Commission is doing for the coming year, and these kinds of minor changes don't necessarily need to be brought up as problematic. So that's it.
No, by all means, bring anything you see that you feel is out of whack, bring it up. And there will be, usually when you guys approve a budget, we'll note that there may be, we will continue to get projects, or just will continue to be typically minor changes, like in the, in the 0.1% range of our budget that we'll continue to correct. So if that's incorrect, Edie, we'll remove that. But yeah, don't hesitate. If you see an error, don't hesitate to let us know. As you can see, we have to track a lot of projects, and sometimes
Yes.
we'll make an error like that. So thanks for bringing that up. That's great.
I think we might have just paid it on our last select board order, but I'm not 100% sure myself. So that
Okay.
was, yep. Thank you.
Any other questions before we go to the budget? I'm not seeing any hands. Gabby, do you see? I'm operating off of one screen, but you guys are, half of you are on one screen and half of you are on another. So, so in the budget, I'll let Anessa get into more details, but basically the things that typically the commissioners care about, the town assessments, we base our increases to the town assessments based on the consumer price index. We went with 3%. That's actually less than the New England consumer price index, which was 3.9%. So theoretically, you could say it's discounted. The effect of the town assessment increase by town, in most cases, we're talking like $100 or a couple $100, if even that. So it's pretty small amounts. So it looks like a lot in aggregate. Well, even in this case, it's not that much, but it really doesn't have a huge effect. But though that's not to discount, though, the aggregate impacts on town budgets with the prices of everything going up. But we try to keep up and have it based on some kind of rational basis, so that we don't ever have to kind of play some massive catch up to help with a shortfall. Several years ago, we had to do something that's more like a 10% increase, but we try to keep that well managed and low. Like I said, we had some base funding increase. We had a 3% increase to the overall state contract through ACCD, an additional like $80,000 one time to help with the Act 250 reform implementation. And then number of local projects, no major new state projects. We already talked about emergency management planning grant. The main differences on the expense lines, healthcare increases, as we all know, we estimated up to a 10.5% increase. Of course, what ultimately happens may wind up being greater than that or less than that. We'll be okay unless it's not some crazy number, but that's what we're anticipating. We did increase staff, basically a cost of living adjustment of 3%. We did add $50,000. We had a graduate intern who we have hired, Anand Fideli, as a new full-time assistant planner, which is awesome. If you look at our staffing structure, we have a lot of senior planners now, but not many junior staff to actually support those senior planners. So we can't always make as efficient a use of the senior planner time. So we've got Anand working with us. He's what we're calling a limited term. He's full-time through this coming fiscal year, FY 2025, and then we'll revisit where we are in our budget situation for the FY 2026 to see if we can keep him at the same rate, number of hours or more. And the other thing that I'll just note is we take a fairly conservative approach, because we don't want to, especially with the housing situation and everything else, we don't want to bring on somebody new only to then have to let them go like a year from now. So staffing, we're fairly conservative. And the other challenge we have is that planners, there's just not a lot of them around. So it's not like we can just kind of pick up somebody temporarily and let them go. But this is one of the reasons why I've tried to establish this pipeline with UMass Amherst regional planning and landscape architecture program. That's how we got Anand. He started with us as an intern, and then we're able to make him full time. We have additional money in the budget for another graduate assistant / intern or otherwise working with universities. So that'll help us as we figure out what our workload needs to be in this coming year. But the other thing that we've done is in laying out this budget and the salaries and benefits and everything else is, people organize their lives around what they make. And so we try to be careful in how we staff up, and we basically have like built into this year's budget. There's about $150,000 in here that if that doesn't show up again in FY 2026, we're not going to have to dramatically cut number of staff or staff compensation. So that's our challenge, right? As a 95% grant funded organization. But we're just trying to take a really responsible approach to being able to be a sustainable organization, because we can't tax our way out of a hole or anything. And our grant receipts are pretty, defined external to us. So the other things, just some new things, we broke out retirement as a separate line just to help us with visibility of the accounting. We also created a new line for organizational memberships and sponsorships. This is what we pay together, like as part of the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. That's the entity through which the regional planning commissions coordinate with each other, with federal agencies, with state agencies, and other things like Southeast Vermont Housing Coalition, our membership to Vermont League of Cities and Towns, our membership to the National Association of Development Organizations, and other things like that. Rent's going up 2%. So those are really the highlights. And that's anything you want to add before we open up to questions?
Chris, another new line at the bottom of after the audit section, the housing infrastructure and community engagement for 30,000. So just go down after the printing and advertisement. So that's another pocket of money that we keep in for our work with the UVM or UMass Amherst work with those programs.
Right. What that is right now, I'll talk about it during my report, but we've got this four-town housing charrette process going on, and we want to see if it's successful. We'd like to replicate it. And what this is having a conversation among 4 towns about thinking together about where does housing within that 4-town area make sense? Like, where would you like to live? Where would you like your children to live, your neighbors and others? Where does it make sense to develop housing from like a livability standpoint, flood avoidance and resilience standpoint, and that kind of thing. So this is a pilot. It's not, and I'll get into the details of it, but hopefully it'll work, and then we can replicate it among another cluster of towns in the region this year. But that charrette process is happening in September, so we should know soon after if people liked it or really hated it or somewhere in between.
Across the staff received 3% of will be receiving 3% of increase in pay compensation. That's pretty much it, Chris. I don't have anything else to add. You covered everything.
Any questions? So our treasurer is Tim Arsenault is out sick today, so I guess we need a motion to approve the work program and budget.
Yep, I don't see any. Sarah should be. Do you have a question, or is that a motion? Motion. Okay, is a motion to approve the work plan and budget? Thank you. And I have a second from Jack. Any further discussion? All right, hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of approving the proposed FY 2025 work plan and budget, raise your hand. Just give me a second because people are on different screens and.
It'd be easier to count the names, I think.
And okay, and are there any nays?
If you could say if you've got an A, that would be helpful, just because of the way the screens are working.
I don't see any nays. Do I have any abstentions? Kara, was that an abstention? So Kara Halpern, you're abstaining. Anyone else that I missed? Okay, so we have one abstention. No nays, motion passes. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Anessa and Chris, for all your work on that. I think, Anessa, you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to depart should you want to.
I will depart. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. And moving on, the next item for our annual business meeting are nominations. And so first, thank you for circulating a slate. We'll take it officers, then executive board members, and then citizens interest commissioners. And usually we have a nominating committee, but because of several departures, we had only one person, and it was a newer person. So our nominating committee wasn't as active as I expect it will be next year. So I think we've reached out to all the citizens interest commissioners and as well as the current executive board members to see if they're willing to serve. And from that, we've put together a slate of officers, executive board members, and citizens interest group and citizens interest members that was circulated this afternoon. And so I'll just read them off so that people, in case they didn't get a chance to see it or read it, are aware. And then, of course, we'll be taking nominations from the floor as well. So I'll take them one by one. So we'll do 3 votes. The first is the vote for officers, and the proposed slate is myself for chair, Jack Cunningham as vice chair, and then Ann Golub from Newfane as our secretary treasurer. Our current secretary treasurer, Tim, has let us know that he would like to step down, and Ann was generous enough to agree to step up, or at least should you vote her in, agree to step up to be the secretary treasurer. So do we have any nominations from the floor? All right, hearing and seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the slate of officers listed. Thank you, Sarah. Let's have a second from George. Any further discussion or comments? All right, hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of electing the slate of officers, please raise your hand. All right, thank you. And I think I see everybody. So put your hands down. Are there any nays? And are there any abstentions? All right, so I think that was unanimous. If I missed a nay or an abstention, let me know now. All right, hearing and seeing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. I'm moving on to the slate of executive board members. The proposed slate is Tim Arsenault from Vernon, Stephen Chait from Halifax, Steve Lemke from Guilford, Bonnie North from Rockingham, Jim Pinkerton from Vernon. They're all current executive board members, just so everyone's aware. And there's also a vacancy. So that's the proposed slate. Are there any nominations from the floor? All right, hearing and seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to elect the proposed slate of executive board members.
Did George raise her hand?
I'm sorry?
Saw George raise her hand.
Yeah, George raised her hand. Anyone else? I'm sorry, do I have a second? Thank you, Sarah. Any further discussion about the slate of executive board members? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of electing the slate, please raise your hand or say aye. Thank you. I think I see everybody, but I'll just check. Put your hands down. Any nays? And any abstentions? I saw no nays, no abstentions, so motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. And our last big vote for the evening is for the Citizens Interest Commissioners. I'll just read them briefly. Agriculture, Lynette Hamilton. Arts and Culture, Robert McBride. Community Development, Gretchen Haverlock. Conservation, Corey Ross. Economic Development, Laura Sibilia. Healthy Communities, Stephen Dotson. Housing, Elizabeth Bridgewater. Natural Resources, Kathy Erfer. And Tourism, Lynn Barrett. So any nominations from the floor? All right, hearing and seeing, Sarah?
I just had a question.
Mhm.
And I apologize for not knowing the answer to this, but what are the roles of the Citizen Interest Commissioners?
Yeah, the roles of the Citizens Interest Commissioners, and you'll see the by sort of category, is to give us insight into that particular aspect of, and the expectation is that they have a relationship or some, an expertise that they would be helping the regional commission with, and usually they serve on their, sort of committees that are specific to their area of expertise.
And what these subjects are totally, this is totally left to the Wyndham Regional Commission. This isn't required by statute or anything like that. It's totally up to you guys, what areas you want to have covered. But a lot of these we've had in place, not necessarily the same people, but these subject areas for some of them precede me. Healthy Communities is the newest one.
Yep. And so they serve really, they serve as resources for us.
Yeah. Could I
And
ask,
often can be partners as well. So, yeah, Stephen, Chait.
what happened to transportation?
That's a committee.
I know.
We
Was
don't-
there a representative from public transportation? No, okay, thank you.
But Stephen, that would typically be like within that could be within any of these, but typically that would fall like within Healthy Communities as far as like walkability, bikeability, transit, kind of healthy living.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions, but we should probably get a motion on the floor before we have any discussion. Cheryl, is that a motion to approve or motion to elect the slate of Citizens Interest Commissioners? Thank you. I have a second by Bonnie. Thank you. Any further discussion or comments or questions? All right, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor of electing our Citizens Interest Committee or Commissioners? All right, I think I see everybody's hands. I'll just check. I like everyone's moving thumbs up and animations. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Stephen, Dotson, are you abstaining?
That's correct.
Okay, so any other abstentions? So we have one abstention. Motion passes. Thank you all for your patience as we went through all of our elections for the upcoming year. That was the major votes that we needed to have happen in order to have our budget in place for next year. So thank you all for making the time and for being here and for being prepared. I'm going to turn it over now to Chris for his executive director's report.
Okay. So first, just want to, as I mentioned, we have hired Anand Fideli. He began with us as an intern, came to us from UMass Amherst, and we've brought him on full-time as an assistant planner. And miracle of miracles, he's able to find an apartment in Brattleboro, and actually lives kind of catty corner, very close to where Colin Bratton, our transportation planner, has been with us about 4 years. He was finally able to move out of a room he was renting into an apartment. So it's great to have these two younger people working with us and finding housing here locally. So that's fantastic. The other thing, there's the legislation was passed this year that created a county regional government advisory committee that's primarily that is looking at different models. It's not changing anything about how Vermont is governed, but it's looking at different models out there that might be considered for Vermont to achieve more of the things that this is looking at it from a state perspective, but they're also talking about it from like helping towns achieve what towns need to achieve. And I'm representing the regional planning commissions on the county regional governance stakeholder technical advisory group. So we're an advisory group to the larger committee. We're not necessarily taking any positions. We're kind of a resource for the larger committee. It's a bit like herding cats. Well, herding, that's not quite that great metaphor, but the people on it, like, so I'm on there from the regional planning commissions, Bob Flint's on there from regional development corporations, Mark Anderson's on there from the State Sheriff's Association, there's somebody there from the School Board Association, Tim Arsenault, who's a commissioner, there's Southern Vermont's represented well, is there representing the clerks, the town clerks association, and this clerks and treasurers association. The entity that's kind of facilitating it is the Vermont Bond Bank. So it's a very diverse group of people, all of which have, you know, interests and insights into their own area of work, professionally or otherwise. Vermont League of Cities and Towns on it. Very broad group of people. So the thinking is that the committee is going to do some of its work this autumn and then take a break during the legislative session. And right now the thinking is this technical advisory group, which will kind of research and look into different issues and options and other models. It looks like that technical advisory group right now, at least what the thinking is we'll do more of our work during the winter, spring / legislative session before the committee kind of resumes its work. One of the things that they in the Senate and I guess House Operations Committees looked at, they took testimony from Connecticut has no county government at all, and they have a Council of Regional Governments, and so they took a lot of testimony from them. They also took testimony from the National Association of Counties. One of the things that I've suggested is that we really need to also look at the Council of Governments model, our counterpart to our South Franklin Regional Council of Governments. In that county, they actually voted to eliminate the county and go with a Council of Governments form of government. They're different from a regional planning commission in that the Council of Governments representatives are actually, I think it's typically like the select board chairs that sit on the Council of Governments, and they go back to their respective select boards and they vote on what they collectively want to pool money to do collectively themselves. And so it's a little different than what you guys as commissioners do. You know, you're appointed by your select boards, but you're not necessarily, unless you're on the select board yourself, speaking for the town, unless you're, told by the town, hey, go to the Rhythm Regional Commission and say this. So it's a little different dynamic, but I'm glad we're having a conversation. I wrote a letter to the editor in Vermont Digger just saying what I've been seeing with the towns, just a lot of our towns are kind of just really straining and kind of breaking under the pressure, especially with the pressure of the disasters, reaching out to us like, how do we do river corridor planning? How do we prioritize projects when not all the river or stream or brook, is in our town? Or how can we share money on salt sheds, which are now costing $1 million a piece? So hopefully this is, I think, just the beginning of a conversation. So we'll see what happens. The perspective I can bring to it, I have a degree in public administration. I'm kind of a public administration geek, but also I've worked, of course, in Vermont, which is what's called a Dillon rule state with very minimalist county government, primarily in the courts and the sheriff's department. Then in New York, I was deputy commissioner of planning there. There you have county government, but you also have actual municipal home rule. Then, of course, worked in Maryland, where that was very strong county government, strong county budgeting, capital improvement planning, capital budgeting. And then in Louisiana, worked in a city parish / county system. So just have visibility into a lot of different models. So I'll report regularly on what the discussion is. All the meetings are recorded, and they're all warned on the legislative site. This group, this committee has its own webpage on the legislative website. And Ann, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I am hoping that in this work, no one will be surprised when I raise this issue, that you have a key focus on just how all of this, as it evolves, will impact the property tax. It is probably the most onerous tax that we have in Vermont. The legislature has no obligation to vote on it, and legislation that might go to implementing the kinds of things that won't be an issue for legislators who have to vote in any significant way. So hopefully that you have a direct aspect of the work that you're doing that will keep the research and the policy position of how all of this would be paid for front and center. Thank you all.
And in the advisory group, so we had our first meeting is just yesterday. And it was an hour and a half meeting. I think that came up about 5 times, Ann. So Rick? You're muted, Rick.
Last month, a group of select board members were invited by Sheriff Anderson to attend a meeting at his office in Brattleboro, describing a regional law enforcement plan that would be based on county funding. And rural town, as you know, the Vermont State Police have kind of been fading away from rural law enforcement. And so some of us in rural towns are struggling with law enforcement, and wondering how what you're describing would interface or with Sheriff Anderson's plan.
I don't know yet, but he's on the advisory group, so we'll see. I'm not being coy. We literally just started talking, so I don't know. And Mark, we talked about his idea probably over a year and a half ago. We haven't met about it. And I don't really know what role as a regional planning commission we would have in regional law enforcement, but these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to deliberate. We may have no role in regional law enforcement. In other RPCs, they've helped facilitate conversations about it. Chittenden County, they help facilitate the conversation about shared dispatch services, and as we know, they created that and then it's dissolved. So one other interesting thing that I suggested too is, we're the other RPCs were given the authority to create through their bylaws to be able to participate in intermunicipal shared services agreements, and just being able to have the bandwidth to have those conversations is challenging with everything else that's going on. But the interesting thing is in Chittenden County, they've kind of reached the logical conclusion of when you have lots of intermunicipal shared agreements, and they're kind of reached a saturation point to where there are so many in place now, the towns have lost track of them, and they don't have enough people to voluntarily serve on them. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a good, robust conversation, and I think I've mentioned to you guys before, this is not unique to Vermont. This is a New England challenge. And, hopefully Vermont can kind of help lead the way. But I'm also really hopeful. When I was at Mississippi State University and LSU, it was really common for the universities to be involved in, at request, to kind of look at different governance structures and governance systems. They would kind of have some removal, but, bring that research into it to look at different models and figure out what works best for the context that we're talking about. And I'm really hopeful that New England wide will, Vermont needs this specifically, but New England wide, the challenge of having so many tiny geographies trying to do so many big complex things that weren't envisioned, when the system was first set up in the 1600s. What do systems look like that retain that local decision making, local control, but then also enable towns to achieve things that otherwise they can't achieve by themselves independently. And then the other thing that I keep raising a flag about is the state adopts, really far-reaching policies that it says it needs to accomplish various goals and objectives. But then it relies on that. It says the towns have to, make these decisions about what, how they're going to implement these state policies. And that's kind of like an unfunded mandate in cases, but it's also, depending on what's going on in the town, it can take a town months, and I've seen years, to be able to find the time and have the capacity to even start a discussion, much less make a decision. And then, everybody's chasing the same grant pool, and you have to chase the grant for project scoping and then design and then implementation. And that can be, dozens of years. And when you've got really acute things that need to happen, like building tens of thousands of units of housing statewide, that can be a process that gets in the way. And it's not just happening in Vermont, it's all throughout New England. So big questions. And I don't begin to pretend that this advisory group or the committee is going to figure it out in a year and a half or 2 years, but at least the conversation is starting.
Thank you.
There's in September, we're going to be convening a 4-town housing charrette. It's the first. It starts, I think it's the 23rd. It goes for 4 days. Forgive me if I get my dates wrong, but this is working with Jamaica, Londonderry, Weston, and Winhall. It's going to be facilitated by the Regional Commission, but also faculty and students at UMass Amherst, and then professional architects and landscape architects brought in through the American Institute of Architecture Communities by Design program. And we've provided a report to the 4 towns that kind of does some preliminary analysis and it does kind of a very high level kind of geographical land suitability analysis, just to kind of think through and inform a conversation within the community about, hey, how much housing do we need for the people in our town now? How much are we going to need in the future, so that we and our children and our neighbors and our parents, our employees, our coworkers can actually stay here over time if they want to? And where does that make sense? Because typically, when you plan housing you're typically looking at geographies beyond just a town, because it's really hard for one town to try to come up with the hundreds of units of housing it may need right now, and certainly looking into the future. So the idea here is for the communities to engage and go through this kind of rapid design process, just to get their minds going about, so where is housing most appropriate in terms of, like, where's the best area that's best suited to putting housing and developing the infrastructure to support it, and to make it a place where people can age gracefully over their lifetime. So, like, maybe they have the opportunity to live in a single family detached home out on the Class 3 town road for part of their lives, but then be able to move into a village to where they can walk or bike or what have you, maybe when they don't want to drive quite so much. What different types of housing are we talking about? How do we make this happen? What kind of infrastructure would it take to support it? None of this is binding. None of this is going into a formal plan. It's literally just to get people thinking beyond their own town boundaries. Where might housing best be suited? And so we'll see how this goes. It could go really well and kind of get juices flowing. I'm sure there's going to be controversy. I'm sure it's going to stem some good ideas. But if it works, then we can see what resources we have to do this for another cluster of towns. And we chose this corner of the region because Londonderry has a grant to actually develop wastewater treatment systems. Jamaica is looking at the engineering options for a wastewater system. Winhall is also talking about it. Their planning commission has talked about, village center designation up there, and what would it take to have more development in the village. And then Weston, all of them have flood issues, but Weston has issues where the village is at high risk. They've got acute housing and employment needs like all the rest of the towns, but they probably more than any of the other towns have real serious constraints about where they could logically build housing. So we'll see how this goes, and I'm looking forward to it. And any questions about that? All right. And then last but not least, so that four-town housing planning charrette is conflict. It's the only week that we could figure out when to do it. That conflicts with the September full commission meeting. Then during the October full commission meeting, there was a whole group of staff that's going to be at the Northern New England chapter of the American Planning Association, and I actually have a panel that I'm doing up in Stowe this year. This year it's in Vermont. Last year it was New Hampshire. Next year it'll be in Maine. So we've got conflicts on those days. For the October, what we need to have a conversation with the commission about how the current regional plan update is going to jive with the Act 250 reforms and the future land use plan reforms, and just kind of get you guys to understand how these things interrelate, and also talk to you about the status of the regional plan and when we're going to be bringing it to you guys to look over a draft before we start taking it out to the general public, town stakeholders, and others for the review. So the idea is we've already done, before this act ever passed, we've already made, we're basically at having a draft done. So we're going to proceed with bringing a plan to you guys for review and approval after we go through a robust public engagement process. But then in a couple of years from now, we'll have to kind of revisit, probably not so much our policies, but our maps. And that's going to require a lot of public engagement too. So anyway, we need to set up a meeting to talk to you guys about that. And then also wanted to have a meeting where Mike McConnell could update you guys on the electricity resiliency zone work that we're doing in collaboration with Green Mountain Power. So I'll be working with the executive board about how we schedule these meetings, what this might look like. Would like to have a meeting in September and one in October. But staff and I are going to come to the exec board with a proposal for that. So sorry for the confusion, but it's just unfortunately we have lots of different competing things. So, any questions on that? And sorry, for some reason I looked down at my notes and you see the top of my head when I'm talking. So I hope I didn't blind you. That's all I've got. Gabby, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Chris. Moving on, I'm going to turn it over to Jack to just update us on the project review committee, what they're looking to review and what they've commented on.
Okay. I think over time, we've brought up when there's been a bit rather large or controversial project, but we haven't made project review a standing agenda item. And I think we're going to start doing that with this meeting. Unfortunately, I'll say at least the last 2 years have been extremely slow with economic development in the region. As a result, and going back more years than that, we had some years that we were extremely busy with major ski resort development and solar farms and wind farms and a number of different big issues. But the last couple of years have been extremely slow. I haven't actually added it up, but I think we have canceled at least half and probably upwards of 3/4 of our meetings for the last couple of years. And in fact, the committee hasn't even met since March because it's just been nothing of note going on. Just as a refresher, I think the old commissioners know this, and the new commissioners, we went over it in orientation. But Act 250 has different thresholds, and we being staff, Alyssa in particular, looks at every Act 250 application that comes in the region. But we as a commission only get involved if one of 3 criteria are met. 1, the committee deems the project to have regional significance. 2, if we deem the project being precedent setting. Or 3, if the host community, the host town, asks us for help. Which means most 250 applications, which are very small and very minor, we just do not get involved with because it just doesn't make sense. So, looking at our 3 thresholds for involvement, there's been very, very little that we've looked at in the last number of years. As a matter of fact, we've only got really 2 things going on now. One is the expansion of a quarry up in Grafton. Chris went to the public hearing for that, I believe it was last week, and we will be talking about that at a September meeting. But it appears, at least on the surface, to have very little in the way of issues that deserve comment or are in any way controversial or require real deep review. And the other one that's hanging out there is Mount Snow is currently operating without a master plan, which we do basically have required, and the Environmental Commission requires major resort development to have a master plan. They've been in the review process for, I think, over a year now. Every time the commission asks them for some more information, they give some portion of what the commission asked for, but never the whole thing. So there's been what's called a recess order saying, we're just time out until you give us some more information. Been a number, I think 3 recess orders issued by the commission on the Mount Snow master plan. So that is an ongoing process that we are, I'll say, monitoring. We're not really actively involved. We commented ages ago on their first attempt at submitting an application, basically asking for more information ourselves. So that's an ongoing thing that we're more monitoring than really month to month involved in. And that is really all that's going on, or all that's on the horizon, right now. But I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
And Jack, I'll just clarify on the Grafton, that it's real, they expanded the quarry during the executive order after the flooding to get material out of there to help rebuild roads. And so now it's really about shutting the quarry down. It's basically expended itself. And so now it's about the reclamation process.
Yeah, it's also one of those that probably would have gone through as what's known as a minor 250, which means it doesn't require a public hearing, and we probably wouldn't have been involved at all, other than one of the abutters had some issues about noise and truck traffic, and he requested a hearing, which forced it into the major status. And by statute, if it's a major application, we're required to file comments. But that doesn't mean we have to say anything in the comments. So we basically, for something like that, we kind of have a form letter that says, yep, we've looked at it. We got nothing to say. Thank you very much. So I don't want to speak for the committee because we'll be meeting next week on it, but I would not be surprised if that's pretty much the stance we take on this one.
Any questions? And I guess that's good advertisement or a good notice for people to say if they are concerned about or want to have a, weigh in on that quarry issue, that they can come to the meeting next week.
Exactly.
Or send emails or do whatnot.
Yeah, and every time we discuss any project in the committee, we send invitations to the town select board, the town's planning commission, the town's commissioners, and pretty much everybody else on the service list, which would mean abutters and so forth. Unfortunately, more often than not, folks don't show up, but they do get invited.
The one thing I'll just note, this applies to all committees, but to be on the email distribution list for any Wyndham Regional Commission committee, of course, everything we do is open to the public, but as a commissioner, if you just want to be on the distribution list, not as a member, you can do that with any of our committees. So if you just have an interest, like, you're already serving on natural resources, but you have an interest in what project review committee is doing, or community development, or energy, you can always ask Ashley to just be added to the distribution list, and she'll relay that to the staff person who chairs that committee, or who staffs that committee.
All right. Well, thank you, Jack, for providing that summary. Eric, you have a question?
I do, yeah. So this is my first ever meeting in this commission, so it was nice to get engaged with you all. I'm wondering how what's the process of getting involved with some of these committees, if one is interested?
So welcome, and if he hasn't sent it to you yet, has Ashley sent you the welcome packet?
Okay.
And so I will, Eric, do you know how to I don't know that I've got your email address. If you could send it to me, if we don't already have, I Gabby, I don't recall appointing him to a committee yet. And I
No,
assume
we haven't.
the select board has sent us a note, I assume, saying that you've been appointed.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that last part. Sorry, Chris.
Do you know if the select board has sent an email notifying us of your appointment?
They said last week that they were going to send it.
Okay, so they may not have done that yet. Okay. So if you would, Eric, if you can, in the Zoom chat, just send me your email address. I'll connect you with Ashley and we'll get the ball rolling.
Yeah,
No,
that sounds
he
good.
sent in his packet and we may have appointed him to transportation and finance.
Oh,
So
okay,
I take
perfect.
that back. I take that back, Eric. You should be hearing from people. And if not, we'll make sure those appointments are on the record at the next executive committee meeting.
Okay,
But I'm
thank you.
99% sure we appointed you to transportation and finance.
That's right. That's the one that just came in. Got it. Yep. Sorry. It's been a busy.
We're very excited to have somebody else on the finance committee. So you're in.
And I don't know, did you mention energy by chance?
Yes.
No, I mean,
Oh, I remember.
no, I think we did transportation and finance. That's my recollection, but we'll check and make sure.
Okay, I don't want to.
You can always go to
Energy
energy if you'd like.
Okay, thanks, Gabby.
Any other comments before we move on? All right, thank you, Chris. I'll make my chair's report pretty brief. I just want to, make people aware that we do have a vacancy on the executive board. So if you're interested, please let myself or Chris know. And we'd also be interested in hearing from anyone who, like Eric, would like to be on the finance committee. We've lost a number of members. And so we're looking to make that a little more robust, as well as the nominations committee. So if anyone has any interest, finance committee meets quarterly, and nominations really only meets around this time of year. So let me know, or Chris know, or Ashley know, if you have any interest in participating in any of those committees.
And on finance committee, Gabby, if I can just add, just while we've got the attention, you don't have to be an expert in public accounting. In fact, it's a good way if you want to learn about kind of public grants management, public accounting, that kind of thing. It's a good way to do it. It's just good to have eyes on what we're doing. So don't feel like you have to be a finance expert to serve on the finance committee. Is that fair to say, Gabby? Yeah.
Absolutely. And, we have Anessa there and as the lead staff person to help answer any questions, who does have, have a CPA and is well versed. So, anyone who's interested, we're, it's part of, our fiduciary duty is really to just have eyes on things and make sure everything looks as it should. And you don't need to necessarily be an expert to ask good questions. All right, with that, I will entertain any public comments. This is the time if you want to comment on something that is not on the agenda. All right, hearing and seeing none. That's the last item on our agenda. So again, I thank everyone for their patience and their attention tonight. And we will be in touch about the next meeting. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Jack. Do I have a second? Jim, thank you.
I was just going to say I'm going to be Tim, because Tim always does the motion for adjournment.
Thank you all and have a great evening. All those in favor of adjournment, geez. Raise your hand. Any opposed? Motion passes. We're adjourned at 7:06 p.m.